Block 1. The End of the Old World. In 1853, Japan saw the future. It had not arrived through prophecies, but with cannons, steamships, and black ships. By the mid-19th century, Japan had lived in isolation for over 2 centuries. This isolation was not seen as backwardness. On the contrary, it was considered the foundation of stability. The Japanese world was orderly and predictable. Everyone knew their place, their duties, and the limits of what was allowed. Real power rested with the shogun. The emperor remained a sacred figure, a symbol of the divine origin of the state, but he did not interfere in governance. The samurai were the military and administrative elite. Their status, honor, and way of life seemed immutable, as did the entire structure of Japanese society. All of this would collapse within months. In the summer of 1853, American ships under the command of Commodore Matthew Perry arrived off the coast of Japan. These were steam frigates, armed with modern artillery. Their arrival was a shock. The Japanese had never seen such vessels. They moved independently of the wind, belched black smoke, and carried a threat that could not be ignored. Perry did not demand immediate war. He presented an ultimatum. Japan had to open its ports to foreign trade. Formally, this was for diplomatic relations. In practice, it meant entering a global system where industrialized nations dictated the rules. The shogunate faced a choice that had no precedent. Refusal meant military conflict with an opponent who had a technological advantage. Concession meant undermining the very foundation of the regime, built on control, isolation, and hierarchy. This crisis instantly reflected throughout society. Samurai, who for generations had considered themselves the defenders of the country, realized their helplessness. Their swords, symbols of honor and power, were meaningless against cannons and steam engines. For the first time, the question arose, did they have a place in the new world? In various regions, anti-shogun sentiment began to grow. The slogan "Sano Joy," revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, spread. It combined fear of the outside world with a desire to regain control over the country's fate. But behind the slogan was no real plan, only a desperate wish to stop the inevitable. The paradox was that the emperor, around whom radicals gathered, held no real power. He remained a distant symbol, yet that symbol was beginning to take on new political significance. For the first time in centuries, the imperial court became the center of an alternative legitimacy. Japan entered a period of deep internal division. The old order still existed, but it no longer seemed eternal. The new order had not yet taken shape, but its presence was felt in every decision, every compromise, every fear. This was not just a conflict between tradition and modernization. It was a struggle for the survival of the state. Japan had to either change faster than its enemies or disappear as an independent nation. From this moment begins the story of the fall of the samurai world and the birth of modern Japan. Block 2. The people who changed history. Historical upheavals never happen by themselves. Behind every revolution are real people, with fears, convictions, and inner contradictions. The Meiji Restoration was no exception. It arose not only from Western pressure, but also from a struggle among the Japanese themselves over what their country should become. One key figure of this period was Seigo Takamori. He came from the Satsuma domain, where samurai culture was particularly strong. Seigo was not a revolutionary in the modern sense. He did not seek to destroy tradition. On the contrary, he believed that tradition could save Japan if it was purified of corruption and the weaknesses of the shogunate. Initially, Seigo supported the Sano Joy slogan. He believed that foreign influence threatened Japan's identity. But unlike many radicals, he was a realist. He understood that Japan could not expel Western powers by force. The only path to survival was to transform the state from within, quickly. Together with other leaders from Satsuma and Chashu, Seigo began acting against the shogunate. It was a dangerous game. Formally, they remained vassals of the shogun, but in practice, they were preparing his overthrow. Their weapons were not only swords, but also political alliances, intrigue, and the use of imperial authority. In 1868, the Tokugawa shogunate fell. The events known as the Meiji Restoration formally returned power to the emperor. In reality, power shifted to a small circle of reformers who understood the scale of the challenge. They had no illusions about the past. Their task was to build a new state as quickly as possible. Emperor Meiji became the face of these changes. His image was consciously transformed. From a sacred, distant ruler, he became a modern monarch appearing in public, wearing Western-style military uniforms, embodying the unity of the nation. This was as much a political project as it was a historical transformation. Seigo initially played an important role in the new government. He supported the creation of a national army, the abolition of the domains, and centralization of the state. But as reforms progressed, his doubts grew. He saw the samurai class gradually stripped of privileges and Western models dominating Japanese traditions. For Seigo, this became an internal tragedy. He had helped destroy the old order, but the new world was alien. His notions of honor, duty, and justice no longer fit the logic of the modern state. What reformers saw as necessary progress, he perceived as a betrayal of Japan's spirit. Tension grew among former allies. The government pursued industrialization, universal military service, and Western institutional models. Samurai, having lost their role, felt redundant. In this atmosphere, Seigo gradually transformed from a hero of the revolution into its critic. Here emerged the conflict that would determine the fate of the samurai class. The man who had helped create a new Japan began to realize there was no place for him in it. Block 3. The end of the samurai. After the Meiji Restoration, the new government acted quickly and ruthlessly. There was no time for hesitation. Japan had learned too well the lesson taught by Western powers. In the modern world, only those who change first survive. One of the main tasks was the complete restructuring of society. The feudal system, which had lasted for centuries based on hierarchy and hereditary privileges, no longer met the demands of the time. This was especially true for the samurai class. Samurai were no longer needed as a separate military class. The new state was building a regular army modeled after Europe. For the first time in Japanese history, universal military conscription was introduced. Every man, regardless of origin, was to defend the country. For samurai, this was a blow to their very identity. They were losing not only their job, but their purpose. Their pensions were reduced, privileges abolished, and social status rapidly devalued. People who had the right to carry swords and give orders yesterday were now forced to find a place in commerce, bureaucracy, or education. The most symbolic act was the 1876 Heitoriai Edict, the ban on public sword wearing. The sword was not just a weapon. It was an extension of the samurai's honor, a sign of status, and part of spiritual discipline. The ban signaled that the state no longer recognized samurai as a distinct class. They became ordinary citizens. Reactions varied. Some accepted the new reality, becoming officials, teachers, or entrepreneurs. From them grew much of the new elite. Others could not accept the changes. In regions where samurai traditions were strongest, resentment accumulated. People who had fought for the emperor and the new Japan felt betrayed by the very state they had helped create. Seigo Takamori withdrew from the government. He returned to Satsuma, gathering former samurai around him. To them, he remained a moral authority, embodying the old values. His image began to take on almost legendary proportions. The government in Tokyo watched closely. It understood that samurai discontent posed a serious threat. At the same time, compromise seemed impossible. Restoring privileges would mean abandoning modernization. Japan had entered a phase where the conflict between past and future could no longer be contained by political decisions. Armed confrontation was approaching. The sword ban was not just an administrative reform. It symbolized the final break with the feudal past and set the stage for the last samurai uprising. Block 4. The Last Uprising. By the mid-1870s, Japan had formally become a modern state. It had a centralized government, a regular army, a tax system, and a program of industrialization. Yet beneath this new surface lay a deep rift. Thousands of former samurai felt betrayed and unnecessary. Seigo Takamori had not planned an uprising. He tried to stay out of politics, educating young samurai in Satsuma and avoiding open conflict with the government. Yet tensions grew. The central authorities suspected him of plotting rebellion, and rumors of possible arrest or assassination spread locally. In 1877, the situation spiraled out of control. Samurai groups in Satsuma revolted, claiming to act in the emperor's name. Seigo faced a choice that would determine his fate: step aside and lose face among his followers, or lead a doomed rebellion. He chose the latter. The Satsuma Rebellion became the last great samurai war. On one side, well-trained but poorly armed warriors relying on traditional tactics and personal courage. On the other, the modern Japanese army, massive, disciplined, armed with rifles and artillery. The battles lasted months. The samurai showed desperate resilience, but every clash highlighted the gap between two eras. Modern warfare left no room for individual heroism. It destroyed the romance of honor and turned battle into a mechanical process. The climax came at the Battle of Shirayama. A small samurai unit was surrounded. Ammunition ran out. Hope of victory vanished. For Seigo, it was the moment of ultimate realization, not just military defeat, but historical defeat. According to legend, he committed seppuku following the samurai code. Regardless of the exact details, his death symbolized the end of an entire class. Along with him vanished the samurai as Japan's dominant force. The government crushed the rebellion. The state prevailed. But this victory came at a price. Seigo Takamori gradually became a legend. From enemy of the state, he became a tragic hero, embodying Japan's internal conflict between tradition and modernization. After the uprising, it became clear there was no turning back. The samurai world ended not from foreign invasion, but from Japan's own choices. It was a painful but conscious decision. Block 5. The Birth of Modern Japan. After suppressing the Satsuma Rebellion, no force remained in Japan to openly challenge the central government. This was a turning point. The state finally had full control and could focus on survival in the New World Order. Reforms accelerated. The West was no longer seen as a moral enemy, but as a source of technology, knowledge, and models to adopt quickly. Japan sent students and officials to Europe and the United States to study everything: military systems, medicine, engineering, law, and governance. Returning home, they formed the core of a new elite, not hereditary, but functional. Infrastructure projects followed: railways, telegraphs, ports, factories. Agriculture was reorganized for reliable tax collection. For the first time, a centralized budget allowed planning years ahead. The military and navy received special attention. Japan remembered the humiliation of the black ships. Now it sought to become a power that set terms, not one that accepted them. The army was reorganized along German lines, the navy along British lines. In a single generation, Japan built one of Asia's most modern militaries. By 1889, the Meiji Constitution was enacted. Formally, it established a limited monarchy and parliament. In practice, it consolidated a strong state, with the emperor as a source of legitimacy and real power concentrated in bureaucracy and military elites. It was a compromise between Western forms and Japanese political tradition. By the late 19th century, results were evident. Japan was no longer weak. It defeated China in the 1894 to 1895 war, gaining Taiwan. The world took notice. A new major power had emerged in Asia. Even more shocking was Japan's victory over the Russian Empire in 1904 to 1905. For the first time in modern history, an Asian country defeated a European power. This shifted the balance of power and elevated Japan's status. With power came a new conviction. Japan began to see itself as exceptional, a nation that could combine tradition and modernization, discipline and technology, imperial worship and industrial might. This conviction would guide future decisions, bring triumph, and eventually lead to catastrophe. Block 6. Japan's duality and the cost of modernization. Early 20th century Japan appeared strange to outside observers. On one hand, it was a modern, industrial state with steel mills, railways, a navy, and a trained army. On the other, it retained ancient religious and cultural traditions, Shinto rituals, and belief in the emperor's sacredness. This duality was central to the national mindset. Japanese people developed a sense of exceptionalism. They believed they could combine opposites, old and new, tradition and technology, spiritual purity and military might. This belief provided strength, but also created tension. It manifested in rapid modernization, army discipline, industrial independence, and diplomatic ambition in Asia. The government understood the country could not stop. Every technological or economic delay could mean loss of sovereignty. At the same time, internal tension remained. Traditional values, codes of honor, and rituals remained vital. People looked to the West while striving to preserve identity. Every reform or innovation was met with internal conflict, duty to the state versus loyalty to the old world. This duality became both the source of triumph and catastrophe. It allowed Japan to become a major power in one generation, yet formed a rigid, tense mindset that left no room for compromise. The state learned to act decisively, but at a high cost. Personal tragedies, cultural losses, generational tensions. The story of Seigo Takamori and his contemporaries illustrates how a nation can lose old values to survive and gain strength, yet also how this process creates new challenges. This is a lesson. Strength and progress always come at a price, and even triumph can hide consequences that emerge later. Block 7. Conclusions and historical lesson. Japan's history in the 19th century shows how a nation can navigate crisis and transformation faster than anyone expected. The old samurai world was destroyed not by external forces, but by Japan's own conscious choice to change, adapt, and survive. The process was painful. It claimed lives, destroyed social structures, and old values. People who were heroes of the past became symbols of loss. Yet these sacrifices allowed the creation of a state capable of facing a rapidly changing world. At the center of this transformation were individuals, not abstract events. Seigo Takamori, Emperor Meiji, and the domain leaders. Each decision they made shaped the course of history. Their personal dramas became the fate of an entire nation. Through people, history becomes vivid, understandable, and real, not a dry record of dates and laws. Japan's success lay in its ability to unite opposites. It preserved cultural and spiritual identity while mastering Western technology and institutions. But this balance was complex, tense, and often contradictory. The nation learned to live with duality, maintaining tradition while embracing the new, acting decisively while upholding discipline. This lesson remains relevant today. Progress and modernization always come with a cost. To change and survive, a country must have vision, resolve, and the courage to make difficult choices. At the same time, it must value what makes it unique, its culture, history, and people. Japan in the 19th century shows that strength and development do not emerge by chance. They require decisive action, tempered with wisdom, to ensure that the very essence of a nation is not destroyed. Balance between past and future determines whether history is written as a triumph or a tragedy.